Julian Assange joins us via Democracy Now! Video stream from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He took refuge in the embassy last June to avoid extradition to Sweden, where he's wanted for questioning around sex assault allegations. On Tuesday, Ecuador's foreign minister accused the British government of trampling on Assange's rights by refusing to allow him to travel to Ecuador, which granted him political asylum almost a year ago. We're going to talk about Jeremy Hammond, about Bradley Manning, and about Julian Assange's own case for this hour. Julian Assange, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you start off by responding to Jeremy Hammond pleading guilty and what his case means to you?
Let's look at what we know and what the prosecution agrees with about Jeremy Hammond. He's a long-term political activist. He's been involved in political activism throughout his political life. The allegation against him is that through his political activism, he became a journalistic source to WikiLeaks and to hundreds of other media organizations in the United States and around the world. The crackdown against Jeremy Hammond is part of, yes, on the one hand, the crackdown on effective political activists, but it's also part of the crackdown on alleged journalistic sources.
I want to turn to Michael Ratner, President Emeritus of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Also, your attorney, Julian Assange, for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. He spoke about the emails from the private intelligence firm Stratfor that were allegedly published by WikiLeaks.
Allegedly, the Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are publishing the material of the Stratfor emails. And so the comparison is that they're going after now a whistleblower and a source, and a person who has been a source to journalists. If you look at what happened with the Stratfor emails, 31 major media around the world in 17 countries published those. He's a whistleblower, he's a source. He ought to be protected like whistleblowers and sources ought to be protected. My client, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, ought to be protected as publishers. He shouldn't have to wind up in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Julian Assange, your response.
Thank you, Amy. This is part of the wider crackdown against journalistic sources, which has been in the news recently as a result of the FBI and the DOJ taking records from the Associated Press and for Fox News journalist James Rosen. That is something that has really risen up under the Obama administration. Obama has, in relation to the Espionage Act, applied it to more people, more journalistic sources and journalists than all previous administrations combined, going back to the origin of that act in 1917. In fact, Obama on his campaign website brags that it's twice as many applications as has been previously done. And that's part of a new centralization of power in the United States. Back in Russia, if we look in the 1990s and Putin's taming of the oligarchs, we had independent points of power in Russia, the 7 oligarchs, the KGB, the Ministry of Defense, and eventually they were all pooled in under one central pyramidical structure. And the same thing has been evolving in the United States over the last 10 years. That's why, for example, we see that the rather unremarked but extremely significant that the State Department budget in its entirety has been moved in under the national security budget. The USAID budget similarly has been moved in under the national security budget. That the head of the CIA is rotated with the head of the military, that there's inter-exchanges at all points, that private military contractors like Stratfor form a type of oil between these different groups, interconnecting them in terms of personnel, information flows, and contracts. A giant centralization of power. The previous rivalrous group to this was perhaps US finance companies and banks. Post-2008, it's clear who is winning, and in order to get anything of significance done in the United States, just like in Russia, you need a sponsor within that patronage network. And as a result of its increasing strength and increasing power, it is able to command an increasing share of the US tax burden, pulling it to itself. The State Department, left on its own, left out there in isolation, was having its budget decline at about 3 to 4% per year in real terms, while the military was having the intelligence complex was having a similar increase in real terms per year. So that's presumably why it decided to jettison some of its independence as an institution and move in under this protective financial umbrella. That shows you the increasing political strength. The US tax burden is picketed over like vultures at a corpse, and the biggest vulture can steal more of the blood of US taxpayers. And the biggest vulture at the moment is the military-industrial complex, and it's getting bigger. It's able to throw more political weight around and able to transfer more finances to itself, which allows it to grow even fatter. Other competing institutions like the Department of Health or pension programs and so on, they also try and compete politically. But in reality, in fact, they are not competing as well as they could in the past, so this machine is getting bigger. And as it gets bigger and bigger, it starts to advance its front to gain more and more power for itself. And the crackdown in relation to the Espionage Act is an example of that. The going after political activists like Jeremy Hammond and trying to put them in prison for 10 years, forcing them to take a plea by ladling them up with a potential 30-year prison sentence under exactly the same piece of legislation that Aaron Swartz found himself faced with, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, same piece of legislation that's used in partly used in the Bradley Manning proceeding, same piece of legislation that's used in the WikiLeaks grand jury. We know that from subpoenas. So this is part of an advancing front, taking grounds, making new claims that those people that effectively criticize this new centralized power group in the United States should not be able to do so.
Julian Assange, in addition to facing a maximum of 10 years in prison, Jeremy Hammond may also be required to pay up to $2.5 million in restitution costs. So you've talked a little bit about how this is part of a widening range of crackdowns on whistleblowers. What do you think this kind of precedent, his plea, sets, and what kind of example do you think it gives for people who are whistleblowers in the future?
Yeah, look, the Obama administration is becoming a sausage factory for making political prisoners. And now we have Jeremy Hammond, John Kiriakou, Bradley Manning, and it is after a number of others as well. The example that it is trying to set, of course, is don't criticize this new power bloc at all. We don't care what means that you do it by. There will be a way found to criminalize it. And people like Hammond and Manning, John Kiriakou, they're used as examples. Like, do something we don't like and we're going to go after you in order to decrease criticism and embarrassment on behalf of this new dominant political institution in the United States.
Do you see Jeremy Hammond as a whistleblower, and if so, why?
Well, Jeremy Hammond is not a whistleblower. He is a political activist. And but the mechanism of his political activism overlaps the mechanism of many different whistleblowers. For example, the alleged whistleblowing activities of Bradley Manning, very similar sort of alleged activity. They're going after him because they don't like the results. They're going after WikiLeaks because they don't like the results. They're going after Bradley Manning because they don't like the results. And to try and keep an appearance of authority, The Pentagon, allied institutions like Stratfor can't keep up our perception of authority if bright young men, determined, courageous and moral, like Jeremy Hammond, are seen to have struck a blow against them and exposed their corrupt activities.
If you could just for a moment, Julian, describe your situation right now, physically where you are. You're standing in front of an image. Describe what that image is, well, the fact of how long you have been inside that embassy.
Right now, I'm inside the embassy, as I have been for 11 months. Before that, I was under house arrest for approximately 590 days, and before that, I was in solitary confinement for 10 days. The image that you see behind you is a frame from Collateral Murder, a famous release by WikiLeaks, which displays the murder of 2 Reuters staff and a number of others in Baghdad in 2007, which was then subsequently covered up by the US military. Bradley Manning has been charged with supplying that video to us and has himself said that he did so. You'll see a cannon shell through the front of the van, and some dead bodies lying around. One of them is Namir Eldoun and Saeed Shmah, the 2 Reuters staff. This video we had as a background frame for a talk that I did at Oxford, similar to the way I'm conducting this one now, beaming in to the Oxford Union. And the Oxford Union redacted the whole background by hand. Even the little monitors that were in the audience, that the audience could see, footage of those monitors they redacted by hand and put that on the internet. You can Google for Assange censored Oxford. Partly to pay tribute to the people who died in this incident, but also to Bradley Manning, and to take a stand against the censorship of Oxford. We've presented this background.
A quick question. Since we last spoke to you, again, holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in November, Bradley Manning has pled guilty. Bradley Manning pled guilty to misusing classified material that he felt, quote, should become public, but denied the top charge against him, aiding the enemy. He acknowledged he gave the classified documents, among them the video that you're describing, what you've called collateral murder, that shows the journalists and the men in New Baghdad blown up by a Apache helicopter. That's footage from the Apache helicopter, and then the subsequent exploding of the van that had 2 children in it. But he has pled guilty to doing this and to giving these documents to WikiLeaks, to you. You have always said you will not reveal your sources, but since he has pled guilty to this, can you talk about the significance of what Bradley Manning gave to WikiLeaks and what you published?
Bradley Manning is making his statements under duress presently. He is facing a capital offence, which Barack Obama would have to sign. So politically, there is possibly only a 3%, say, a chance that Barack Obama would sign a death certificate, or that the judge would decide to promote a death certificate. But if there was a 3% chance of you crossing a road, you wouldn't do so. He's also facing a quite decent chance of life imprisonment. And the life imprisonment charge comes from a very new ambit claim of the Pentagon, that is, and the Department of Justice, that is communicating with a journalist, is communicating to the public, is communicating to Al-Qaeda. And there's no allegation that Bradley Manning intended to communicate to Al-Qaeda. The only allegation is that he indirectly did so as a result of communicating with journalists who communicated to the public. If that precedent is allowed to be erected, it will do two things. Firstly, it means it's a potential death penalty for any person in the military speaking to a journalist about a sensitive matter. Secondly, it also embroils the journalist and the publication in that chain of communicating, they would say, to the enemy, and therefore making them susceptible as well to the Espionage Act, which also has capital offences. And that is part of the US, that latter part is part of the US attack on WikiLeaks, including myself.
Julian Assange, there are about 150 witnesses who are set to testify against Manning at the trial. Among those witnesses, the Washington Post reports, is a person they've called a DOD operator, whose name they've not revealed, who is likely to say that Osama bin Laden received access to some of the WikiLeaks material through an associate because of what Manning revealed.
Well, the latest information I have is that there are, in fact, 4 of those people involved in the Osama bin Laden raid who will be testifying in one way or another. This is, of course, part of the show trial. The alleged actions here are a communication between a source and a journalist. There's no allegation anyone else was present in the room. So 141 prosecution witnesses, 31 of them giving secret testimony in part or behind a screen or something like this. This is a show trial. The trial is meant to go for 14 to 16 weeks, and the prosecution, the Pentagon, and possibly the White House is hungry for this. This is their big Broadway musical moment, and they have their star divas from the SEALs and elsewhere that they intend to put up in order to terrorize people from communicating with journalists and communicating with the public.
Julian Assange, what do you think the significance is of the fact that over 24 witnesses will partially testify in secret?
Well, it's a furtherance of what we've been seeing as this new pyramidical structure of centralized intelligence and military power continues to gain financial and political capital. It is advancing the frontiers to the degree where it is now conducting extensive secret trials. The same thing has been introduced here in the UK. But we all know that without open justice, there is no justice at all. Justice must be seen to be done. Judges must themselves be on trial before the public as they conduct trials. We're all aware of the terrible abuses in the past that have come about as a result of secret star chambers. But nonetheless, the neo-military industrial complex has gained enough political power where it is able to, or at least it thinks that it is able to, go back to this earlier depraved time.
I want to turn to recent comments made by the Australian Foreign Minister Bob Carr. He was speaking to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and was asked specifically about the threat of your possible extradition to the US in the event that you're taken to Sweden.
Julian Assange could have been the subject of extradition action by the United States any time in the last 2 years when he's been residing in the UK. He wasn't. To suggest that the Swedes are after him as a CIA conspiracy to get him to Stockholm and allowing him to be bundled off to Langley, Virginia, is sheer fantasy. The Swedes have won in the UK courts. It's nothing to do with WikiLeaks. It's about a criminal allegation made in Sweden. And that's why he's in the Ecuadorian embassy. In this, Australia has precisely no status. We've got no standing in the courts on this in the United Kingdom. We've made representations to the Swedes about him being treated with due process. We've done that 3 times this month. We've made
by the way, just on that score, have you got some sort of assurance from the Swedes he would never be extradited to the United States?
The Swedes say it is our policy and has been our policy for decades that we never extradite someone on a matter related to military, or intelligence. They just don't do it.
Julian Assange, that was Australian Foreign Minister Bob Carr. Could you comment on what he said?
Bob Carr is a well-known liar in Australian politics. The man's ignorance is only eclipsed by his arrogance. WikiLeaks published records showing how Bob Carr became a US embassy informer way back in the 1970s, why he was in the unions, why he had no business whatsoever dealing with the US embassy. At that time, he was giving sensitive political intelligence on the Australian Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. And that Gough Whitlam was subsequently removed in 1975 in a political coup in Australia. Look, let's go through these points by Bob Carr. Bob Carr is a master of rhetoric. For example, he says that there's no evidence of some CIA conspiracy designed to smuggle me off to Langley, Virginia. They're quite right. That's not the issue at stake here. That's a straw man that is erected by Bob Carr. What there is extensive evidence. In fact, the DOJ admits, as of March, which is subsequent, but has also made previous admissions, that the investigation, the criminal investigation against WikiLeaks, which Australian diplomats in their own official correspondence have said is of unprecedented scale and nature, continues. That is admitted by the DOJ. The subpoenas that have come out as a result of the grand jury always just have two names on them, Bradley Manning's name and my name. Those are the only two people who were named in those subpoenas. In the Bradley Manning court case, government witnesses say, when cross-examined under oath, that the targets of the grand jury investigation are the founders and managers of WikiLeaks, amongst some others. Now, in relation to whether Sweden extradites, there's a number of issues here. First of all, let's look at timing. Bob Carr says the United States could have extradited any time that they liked. Well, just go and look at Justice for Assange with the numeral 4.com/extraditing-assange.html. It's justiceforassange.com/extraditing-assange.html. It is normal for grand juries to go for 2 to 3 years. That is absolutely normal. The DOJ admits that this grand jury in relation to us is still going. John Carricou's grand jury went for a number of years. Frank Drake's grand jury went for a number of years. Furthermore, it is unlawful for any US official to admit to the existence of a sealed indictment, even to other US officials, except in carrying out the arrest. It's only after the person has been arrested. So that is the situation that I face in the UK. If I walk outside, I could be arrested in relation to Sweden, I could be arrested in relation to the United States. What Bob Carr doesn't say is that I have never been charged for an offence in Sweden. While there's a decent chance of a secret indictment in the United States, and my lawyers say that they believe that there is a secret indictment, that records from Stratfor, allegedly obtained by Jeremy Hammond, reveal the existence of a secret indictment. There is no charge against me in relation to Sweden. The Swedes refuse to provide a guarantee to me, to Ecuador, that I will not be re-extradited to the United States as soon as I hit Sweden. They also say formally, and said so before I came into the embassy, that I would be imprisoned without charge in Sweden, initially said held incommunicado during the course of their preliminary investigation. It is perfectly normal, and the head of the Swedish Supreme Court even has come out and said it is normal and correct for Swedish police, if they are investigating some allegation, to have a phone call with the person, to take a statement, to come to the country here. The Swedes refuse to do that. They refuse to explain why even that they are doing that. And this whole matter was investigated by the most senior prosecutor in Stockholm, Eva Finney, who the Swedes have now appointed to head up the investigation into their race riots, investigated by Eva Finney and dropped. The case was dropped. It was resurrected subsequently by a politician, Claes Borgström, who went to a different city, Gothenburg, to a particular prosecutor there and got that prosecutor to resurrect the matter.
I wanted to ask you quickly, Julian, about the Icelandic Supreme Court decision around visa and the whole issue of how the money supply to WikiLeaks has been cut off online. If you can explain this latest development.
Well, Amy, first let me contextualize it. There's attacks on all fronts against WikiLeaks. Criminal, reputational, financial, in many different countries. There's also counterattacks that we have been making. And in relation to this visa blockade, back in late 2010, US right-wing politicians like Senator Lieberman contacted a number of different financial institutions in the United States and encouraged them to cut off WikiLeaks as a recipient of visa donations, our donations, but via Visa. Now, as a result, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Money Bookers, Western Union, Diners Club, Discover, JCB, and the Bank of America, and Swiss Post Finance. That's 10 different financial organizations, as a result of that pressure, engaged in extrajudicial financial blockade against us and our donors, much the same as they do to Cuba, but without any legislative backing, without any administrative backing. Even the US Treasury Secretary, Geithner, investigated whether we should be formally added to a US blacklist and found that there was no legal basis to do so. In response, WikiLeaks for the past year and a half or so has been engaged in litigating some of these giant financial services companies that are influenced by Washington power brokers. And we won in the lower courts in Iceland, and we have won in the Supreme Court in Iceland just a few weeks ago. Now, that victory in the Supreme Court stated that Visa must open up the gateway, and its subcontractor, Valitor, in Iceland must open up the gateway. Visa has relented and has opened up the gateway. However, it has also activated what it says is another clause in the contract to shut it back down again on midnight June 30. So between now and midnight June 30, people can donate directly to WikiLeaks. Otherwise, they have to, come midnight June 30, they'll have to engage in indirect mechanisms. But they are there, for example, Daniel Ellsberg, John Cusack, John Perry Barlow, and some others set up the Free Press Foundation in the United States precisely to deal with some of these economic blockades. But if you go to wikileaks.org/donate, you will see that there's different ways that we have constructed to work around this economic blockade. Unfortunately, they're all a little bit indirect, so it's a little bit of an extra burden for donors and a reputational burden, because you don't see that you're donating directly to WikiLeaks, but you see that you're donating to the Free Press Foundation or the Valholland Foundation in Germany, or a number of others. But donations now to WikiLeaks via the Free Press Foundation in the United States are tax deductible. We've also had a major victory in Europe in relation to the German tax authorities, which also were politically pressured, and that has come out and been admitted to remove our tax deductibility in Europe. That's now back. We've won against that. So the position of my asylum here is such that we've been able to concentrate more of our resources on counterattack and have been successfully engaged in that battle.
We wanted to switch gears right now. The CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, has come out with a new book called The New Digital Age. And we wanted to ask you about a meeting you had. On June 23rd, 2011, Julian Assange, you had a secret 5-hour meeting with the Google CEO, Eric Schmidt. At the time, you were under house arrest in rural England. Also in attendance, Jared Cohen, former advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Scott Malcolmson, director of speechwriting for Ambassador Susan Rice at the State Department, and current communications director of the International Crisis Group, and Lisa Shields, vice president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Schmidt and Cohen requested the meeting to discuss their ideas for this book that has just come out, The New Digital World. We want to go to a part of your conversation with Schmidt and Malcolmson. This is a recording you made of that meeting, first time being played in a national broadcast, where you talk about the Patriot Act.
We wouldn't mind a leak from Google, which would be, I think, probably all the Patriot Act requests.
Yeah, which would be illegal.
Depends on jurisdiction.
We are a U.S.
There's higher laws, First Amendment, you know.
No, I've actually spent quite a bit of time on this question because I'm in great trouble because I've given a series of criticisms about Patriot 1 and Patriot 2. Because I think they're because they're non-transparent, you know, because the judge's orders are hidden and so forth and so on. And the answer is that the laws are quite clear about Google in the U.S. That we couldn't do it. It would be illegal.
So we're fighting this case now with Twitter. We've done 3 court hearings now, trying to get the names of the other companies that fulfilled the subpoenas to the grand jury in the U.S. Twitter resisted, and so that's how some of us became aware. They argued that we should be told that there was a subpoena. I wasn't told, but...
This is concerning you?
Yeah, me personally. Yeah. But 3 other people. But we know there's at least 4 other companies.
I can certainly pass on your request to our general counsel.
Tell them to argue that we should be told.
So your specific request is that Google argue legally that WikiLeaks as an organization should be informed,
or any of the individuals.
Or the individuals, if they are named in a FISA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will pass that along.
That is a part of this 5-hour conversation that you had with the CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and Scott Malcolmson, director of speechwriting for UN Ambassador to Susan Rice. Can you talk about the circumstances of this meeting, how you made this recording, and then talk about the substance of what we just heard?
It's quite interesting to speculate as to the surface excuse for the meeting being about a book versus was there another side to it as well. If we look at the way Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen have been going to North Korea and meeting with some other figures, and how that information very rapidly goes back to the State Department, we know that the results of that meeting with Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen went very, very quickly back to the top levels of the State Department. They're in some ways becoming informal, deniable foreign ministers for a section of US power. That's a very interesting thing to see Google resting so heavily on the US State Department.
I want to turn to an excerpt from the book by Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen called The New Digital Age, Reshaping the Future of People, Nations and Business. In it, the authors suggest WikiLeaks has endangered lives. They write, quote, "Neither WikiLeaks nor groups like Anonymous are terrorist organizations, although some might claim that hackers who engage in activities like stealing and publishing personal and classified information online might as well be. The information released on WikiLeaks puts lives at risks and inflicted serious diplomatic damage, end quote. The authors don't cite evidence for their claim, but they do put an asterisk next to the statement saying, quote, at a minimum, platforms like WikiLeaks and hacker collectives that traffic in stolen classified material from governments enable or encourage espionage. Julian Assange, your comments on that quote taken from Eric Schmidt's book?
Well, it's absurd. States that engage in espionage want to keep the information that they gain to themselves in order to get competitive knowledge advantage over other states, and also simply to protect their sourcing operations. There's a reason why that claim, like all such claims, remains uncited, because it is false. Not even the Pentagon, in fact, no government organization claims that the activities of WikiLeaks have led even to the loss of life for a single person anywhere in the world. And if we want to speculate about speculative risks as opposed to talk about the hundreds of thousands of cases of hundreds and thousands of deaths that WikiLeaks documented, the US military being involved in one way or the other, then we can go to a statement made by NATO in Kabul, reported by CNN, that NATO could not see a single case of an Afghan needing protection or needing to be moved as a result of our publication of the Afghan War Diaries. And that it was the Afghan War Diaries that led to all these rhetorical flourishes by the Pentagon and by the establishment media in the United Kingdom, led by Murdoch, and in the United States.
Let me end with your response to Alex Gibney's recently released documentary. We interviewed him at Sundance, the documentary called We Steal Secrets, the Story of WikiLeaks. This is Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA and National Security Agency, or NSA.
Everyone has secrets. Some of the activities that nation-states conduct in order to keep their people safe and free need to be secret in order to be successful. If they are broadly known, you cannot accomplish your work. Now, look, I'm going to be very candid, all right? We steal secrets. We steal other nations' secrets. One cannot do that above board and be very successful for a very long period of time.
Michael Hayden, former director of CIA and the National Security Agency, or NSA, his statement, We Steal Secrets, the one that Alex Gibney used for the title of his documentary. Your response, Julian Assange, and have you gotten to see this documentary?
The claim in the title is simply false. It had spread everywhere, of course, because it's in all the promotional literature. I assume very few people will go actually to see that film, but the promotion has been done by Universal. That's a $2.5 million hit job on my reputation, the reputation of the organization. What's the equivalent title? I make fictitious fraudulent films, the story of Alex Gibney. In response, we have published the full transcript ahead of the film's release, with line-by-line details showing exactly how Alex Gibney edited statements, stitched them together, etc., and didn't engage, it seems, in any fact-checking of the statements that the people he was interviewing. For an example, I make some statement that begins with, well, what they say is, and then I quote it. Alex Gibney cuts off the what they say. So in order to put someone else's words into my mouth. And that's present throughout the film. This is not a serious work. 10 seconds
in this part of the interview,
This is not a serious work, and this is not a serious filmmaker.